My wife sat confidently beside her, lawyer, while I remained quiet at the opposite end of the conference table. The mediation meeting wasn't supposed to be emotional. It was supposed to be practical, civil, professional. Instead, it felt like 15 years of marriage, being reduced to a list of assets and liabilities. Every item carried a memory. Comma. Every number represented years of effort. But nobody in that room seemed interested in memories. They only cared about value. Comma. And according to everyone there, I didn't have much of it. The irony almost made me laugh. Almost. My attorney slid a document toward me. I signed it without argument. My wife noticed. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. She mistook acceptance for defeat. That wasn't the first thing she'd misunderstood about me. Not even close. If someone had met us 10 years earlier, they would have said we were happy. And they would have been right. Back then we lived in a small 2-bedroom house. The roof leaked whenever it rained hard. The kitchen was outdated. The driveway cracked every winter. But none of that mattered. We were building something together. At least I thought we were. She worked in human resources. I worked long hours in aviation maintenance. The pay wasn't impressive. The hours were worse. Most mornings started before sunrise. Many nights ended long after dark. My clothes constantly smelled like machine oil and jet fuel. I spent my days crawling beneath aircraft and solving problems nobody else wanted to touch. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. But I loved it. I loved understanding how things worked. I loved fixing complicated problems. Most importantly, I loved the feeling of building something meaningful. Back then, my wife admired that about me. She used to tell people how hardworking I was. She used to brag about my dedication. Whenever friends complained about their husbands wasting time, she'd smile proudly and say, "Mine was always working towards something." Somewhere along the way, that changed. I can't tell you the exact day. There wasn't a dramatic moment. No single argument. No betrayal. Just hundreds of tiny disappointments accumulating over time. At first, the changes were subtle. She started comparing us to other couples. Nothing serious. Just casual observations. A friend bought a new luxury SUV. Another couple moved into a larger house. Someone's husband got promoted. Someone else started a successful business. Normal conversations. Normal comparisons. At least that's how they started. Then the comparisons became questions. Why didn't we have a bigger house? Why was I still driving the same truck? Why wasn't I interested in expensive watches? Why didn't I care what people thought? The truth was simple. I had different priorities. The truck worked perfectly. The house met our needs. The watches told the same time as every other watch. I never saw a reason to spend money proving something to strangers. My wife didn't see it that way. Neither did many of her friends. One evening we attended a birthday party hosted by one of her co-workers. The driveway looked like a luxury dealership. Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers. Vehicles that cost more than our first house. When I parked my pickup at the far end of the street, I noticed my wife's expression immediately. She stared through the windshield. Silent. Embarrassed. I pretended not to notice. Inside the party, things got worse. A man I'd never met asked what I drove. When I told him, he laughed. Not maliciously, just dismissively, as though I'd admitted to some personal failure. Several people joined the conversation. Soon everyone was discussing cars, leases, luxury packages, custom interiors. I had nothing to contribute, and honestly I didn't care. But my wife cared. I saw it in her eyes. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable standing beside me. That feeling never completely disappeared. Over the following years, it grew. Every family gathering seemed to include another comparison. Another reminder that someone else had more. A bigger house, a newer vehicle, more visible success. Meanwhile, I kept living exactly the same way. I still wore inexpensive clothes. Still drove the truck. Still worked long hours. Still refused to explain every business decision I made. The truth was that my work had begun changing years earlier. While everyone focused on appearances, I focused on opportunities. The aviation industry introduced me to people most never meet. Pilots, aircraft owners, charter executives, maintenance directors, investors. Over time, those relationships opened unexpected doors. I started consulting, then advising, then helping solve larger operational problems. Nothing happened overnight. There were no lottery tickets, no miraculous breakthroughs, just years of careful work, years of observing, years of learning, years of making decisions that looked insignificant from the outside. Unfortunately, my wife only saw the outside. She saw the truck, the old house, the simple clothes. She didn't see the meetings, the contracts, the conversations happening behind closed doors, partly because I never talked about them. I've always believed results matter more than announcements. People spend too much time talking about what they're going to do. I'd rather do it first, then speak later. Eventually my travel increased. Some months I flew several times. Other months I barely left home. My schedule became unpredictable. Sometimes I received phone calls late at night. Sometimes I spent weekends reviewing reports. Whenever my wife asked questions, I answered honestly. But she stopped listening carefully. The answers sounded boring. Aviation operations, maintenance management, fleet logistics. Nothing exciting, nothing worth discussing. At least in her opinion, the distance between us grew gradually, not because we fought, because we stopped being curious about each other. That's far more dangerous. Arguments mean people still care enough to engage. Silence means they're drifting apart. By our 14th year of marriage, we were living parallel lives. We ate dinner together, watched television together, attended events together, but emotionally we were miles apart. Then came the conversation that changed everything. I returned home from a 3-day business trip. She was waiting in the kitchen. The moment I saw her expression, I knew something was different. There was no anger, no sadness, only certainty. The kind of certainty people have when they've already made a decision. She folded her hands, looked directly at me, Karma, and said the words I'd never expected to hear. I think I want a divorce. For several seconds I said nothing, not because I was shocked, because I was disappointed, deeply disappointed. Not in her, in us, in what we'd allowed ourselves to become. She immediately began explaining. She talked about growing apart, different goals, different lifestyles, different visions for the future. Some of it was true, most of it was. Then she said something that hurt more than everything else combined. I don't think you've ever wanted more. Those words stayed with me, because they revealed how little she understood me. I'd always wanted more. I just never needed everyone else to see it. The following week she officially filed. Friends called. Family members took sides. Rumors spread. People assumed I was devastated. People assumed I was hiding financial problems. People assumed I had failed somehow. I corrected none of them. Instead I signed the paperwork, hired an attorney, and quietly prepared for what came next. Because while everyone else was focused on the divorce itself, I knew the real surprise hadn't happened yet, and neither my wife nor anyone else was remotely prepared for it. The divorce moved forward faster than I expected. Within weeks, lawyers were exchanging documents, scheduling meetings, and discussing assets as if 15 years of marriage could be measured by spreadsheets. Maybe it could. At least that's how everyone treated it. My wife certainly did. The more paperwork arrived, the more confident she became. Every meeting seemed to strengthen her belief that she was making the right decision. Whenever our attorneys gathered around conference tables, she carried herself like someone who had already won. She rarely looked directly at me anymore. When she did, there was something different in her eyes. Not hatred, not even anger, just disappointment. As if I had failed some tests without realizing it. I never argued, never raised my voice, never accused her of anything. That confused people. Most divorces create battle lines. Ours didn't. At least not publicly. The truth was that I wasn't interested in fighting. Not because I didn't care, because I understood something most people didn't. Arguments rarely change outcomes. Preparation does. While everyone focused on the divorce, I focused on my business. For years, I had quietly built relationships throughout the aviation industry. The work started long before anyone noticed. Back when I was still spending 10-hour shifts repairing aircraft. Most people imagine aviation as luxury, private jets, wealthy passengers, exclusive airports. The reality is much less glamorous. It's paperwork, regulations, maintenance schedules, safety inspections, thousands of small details that determine whether aircraft remain in service. I learned every part of that world, not because I planned to become wealthy, because I was genuinely interested. Curiosity became opportunity. Opportunity became expertise. Expertise became value. Years earlier, an aircraft owner had approached me with a problem. His maintenance operation was losing money. His staff turnover was terrible. His scheduling system was outdated. He asked for advice. I helped. The improvements worked. Then he referred me to someone else. And someone else. And someone else. Before long, consulting became a significant part of my income. Still, nobody noticed, including my wife. Partly because I continued living exactly the same way. I still drove the truck. Still wore inexpensive clothes. Still avoided unnecessary spending. The money wasn't changing me. It was giving me options. There is a difference. Many people don't understand that. They assume wealth automatically creates luxury. Sometimes it creates freedom instead. Freedom had always interested me more than appearances. Several years before the divorce, I began investing in small aviation companies. Nothing dramatic, nothing risky. Just businesses I understood. Maintenance facilities, charter management firms, part suppliers, training operations. Each investment looked insignificant on its own. Together they became something much larger. I acquired small ownership percentages, then larger percentages, then controlling interests. Some companies struggled, others thrived. Over time the portfolio expanded, not because I was brilliant, because I remained patient while everyone else chased shortcuts. My wife never asked detailed questions, and I never forced the conversation. When I mentioned meetings, she lost interest. When I explained acquisitions, she changed the subject. When I discussed aviation trends, she checked her phone. Eventually I stopped sharing altogether. Not out of secrecy, out of practicality. People stop talking when they realize nobody is listening. The divorce process revealed just how little anyone knew. One afternoon my attorney called. Have you reviewed the latest filing? I had. Every page, every accusation, every assumption. The most surprising part wasn't what my wife claimed. It was what she believed. According to her filings, she genuinely thought my financial situation was ordinary. She believed the house represented most of our assets. She believed the truck reflected my lifestyle. She believed my consulting work generated modest income. In other words, she believed exactly what everyone else believed. My attorney laughed when he finished reading. Not because the situation was funny, because it was astonishing. She has no idea, does she? No. Are you going to tell her? No. He paused, then laughed again. The truth would emerge eventually. There was no reason to rush it. Meanwhile, my wife continued building her own narrative. Friends reinforced it constantly. I heard things through mutual acquaintances. They called me unambitious, average, stubborn, comfortable with mediocrity. One person even described me as a man who never achieved his potential. That one actually made me smile. Potential is invisible. That's why people misjudge it so often. The months passed. Lawyers requested financial disclosures. My team provided everything. Every company. Every asset. Every valuation. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was transparent. Still, because of the complexity involved, many of the documents required time to process. That delay created a dangerous illusion. My wife assumed the missing information didn't matter. She assumed she already understood the full picture. Confidence can be expensive when it's built on assumptions. One evening, several weeks before the final hearing, I attended a private aviation conference. The event took place in Dallas. Hundreds of executives filled the convention center. Aircraft manufacturers, operators, investors, industry leaders. For 2 days I moved from meeting to meeting, discussing acquisitions, fleet expansion, partnership opportunities. By the time the conference ended, my company had finalized another major agreement. The deal significantly increased the value of several businesses I owned. When I returned home, my wife never asked where I'd been. She simply assumed it was another routine work trip. That moment stayed with me, not because I wanted recognition, because it perfectly illustrated the distance between us. The person who once celebrated every achievement no longer cared enough to ask questions. Eventually, the court scheduled the final divorce hearing. One date, one courtroom, one decision that would formally end 15 years of marriage. The moment the date became official, something changed in my wife's attitude. Her confidence transformed into certainty. She started speaking about the future differently. The divorce was no longer a possibility. It was a victory she expected. Mutual friends noticed it too. At social gatherings, she openly discussed new plans, new opportunities, new beginnings. Every conversation carried the same assumption, that she was moving upward, and that I was being left behind. A week before the hearing, one mutual friend accidentally revealed something interesting. We were attending a small dinner when she mentioned a conversation she'd recently had with my wife. At first she seemed hesitant. Then she repeated the exact words. After next week, he'll have nothing left. The table fell silent. Several people glanced toward me. Karma, waiting for a reaction. I simply smiled, then continued eating. The friend looked embarrassed, but I wasn't upset, because those words revealed everything. My wife truly believed she understood the situation. She truly believed appearances reflected reality. She truly believed the old truck represented my entire life. And in 7 days, she was going to discover how wrong she had been. As the hearing approached, my attorney called one final meeting. We reviewed documents, ownership structures, business valuations, asset reports. The stack of paperwork filled half the conference table. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair. You know this is going to shock everyone. I looked out the window, toward the parking lot, toward the rusty pickup waiting outside. Maybe he was right. Maybe it would shock them. But the truth wasn't what interested me. What interested me was the lesson. Because wealth had never been the story. The story was perception. How quickly people judge. How confidently they assume. How easily they confuse simplicity with failure. The hearing was 7 days away, and for the first time since the divorce began, I was genuinely curious to see what would happen. The morning of the final hearing arrived, with clear skies and the kind of heat that settles over a city before noon. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was nervous, because I wanted a few quiet minutes before everything changed. The house felt different that morning, almost empty, not physically, emotionally. 15 years of memories lived inside those walls, yet by lunchtime they would belong to the past. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window. For a moment, I thought about all the ways this marriage could have ended differently. Maybe if we'd listened more. Maybe if we'd talked honestly. Maybe if we'd stopped comparing our lives to everyone else's. But regrets don't change reality. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and headed outside. My rusty pickup sat exactly where it always did. The paint was faded. Rust covered parts of the body. The tires had seen better days. To most people, it looked like the vehicle of a man who had failed. To me, it looked like freedom. That truck had carried me through the hardest years of my life. I wasn't ashamed of it. Not even a little. The courthouse parking lot was already busy when I arrived. Lawyers moved quickly across the sidewalks. Families gathered near the entrance. People stood in small groups talking. The moment I parked, I noticed several familiar faces. Friends. Relatives. People who had somehow become spectators in a private matter. My wife arrived 10 minutes later. She stepped out of a luxury SUV wearing a fitted red dress and expensive heels. Her posture radiated confidence. She looked like someone attending an awards ceremony rather than ending a marriage. Several family members immediately surrounded her. They smiled. They laughed. One of them glanced toward my truck and shook his head. Another pointed at it. I didn't need to hear the conversation. Their expressions said enough. Then my wife saw me. A slow smirk appeared on her face. Not cruel, not vicious, just satisfied. As if my truck confirmed everything she already believed. As if it proved she had made the correct decision. She looked away first. The hearing wasn't scheduled to begin for another 30 minutes. People continued arriving. Lawyers reviewed files. Court employees moved through the building. The atmosphere felt strangely calm. Then something happened. A low rumble echoed across the distance. At first nobody paid attention. The sound grew louder. Several people turned toward the sky. A private jet appeared above the city before descending toward the nearby executive airport. The aircraft was beautiful. White exterior. Polished finish. Large enough to attract attention. Still, nobody connected it to me. Why would they? I was standing beside a rust-covered pickup truck. The jet landed, People watched for a moment before returning to their conversations. Minutes passed. Then a black luxury vehicle pulled up near the courthouse entrance. The driver stepped out. Moments later, another man emerged. Dark navy pilot uniform. Gold stripes, professional posture, confident walk. The pilot scanned the crowd, then started walking directly toward me. I noticed my wife's expression change immediately. Not shock. Confusion. She looked behind her, then around the parking lot, trying to figure out who the pilot was actually approaching. The crowd noticed too. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. People watched. Karma. The pilot stopped directly in front of me. Then he smiled. Good morning, sir. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the traffic noise seemed to disappear. The pilot continued. The jet is ready whenever you'd like to leave after the hearing. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My wife's smirk vanished. The expression froze halfway between confidence and disbelief. One of her relatives actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, because his brain couldn't process what he had just heard. The pilot extended a folder toward me. I accepted it calmly. Thank you, I said. Of course, sir. The word hit the crowd harder the second time. Sir. Not buddy. Not mister. Sir. The kind of respect reserved for someone important. Someone powerful. Someone they clearly didn't think I was. The pilot nodded politely before stepping aside. The damage was already done. Questions exploded across the parking lot. People whispered, pointed, stared. My wife never took her eyes off me. For the first time since the divorce began, she looked uncertain. The hearing finally started. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt completely different. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone was waiting for an explanation. My wife sat beside her attorney. I sat beside mine. The judge entered. Proceedings began. At first, everything seemed routine. Property discussions, asset reviews, financial disclosures. Then my attorney requested permission to introduce additional documentation. Boxes were carried forward. Thick binders followed. The judge adjusted his glasses. My wife's attorney frowned. The room grew quiet. One document became 5. 5 became 20. Ownership records, corporate structures, valuation reports, investment summaries, aircraft management agreements, maintenance facilities, hangar leases, fleet ownership interests. Every page revealed another layer. Every layer revealed another surprise. The confidence draining from my wife's face became impossible to ignore. She kept flipping through documents. Then flipping back, certain she had misunderstood something. But she hadn't. The numbers were real. Every asset was real. Every company was real. Every valuation had been verified. For years she believed she understood my life. For years she believed my truck represented my success. Now she was discovering how little she actually knew. The judge reviewed another report. Then another. Then another. Finally he looked directly at me. The entire courtroom waited. My wife stopped breathing. Even her attorney looked stunned. The judge lowered the document in his hands, then asked a question that changed everything. Mr. Williams, is this valuation correct? And for the first time that day, every person in that courtroom realized the man they thought they knew had never really been seen at all. The courtroom remained silent. Not the ordinary kind of silence, the kind that happens when reality suddenly collides with everything. People thought they knew. The judge continued reviewing the documents. My wife's attorney stopped taking notes. Several people sitting behind us leaned forward in their seats. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. For years, people had looked at me and seen a man driving an old pickup truck, a man wearing ordinary clothes, a man who never bragged, never showed off, never chased attention. They assumed simplicity meant failure. Now those assumptions were collapsing one page at a time. The judge looked toward my attorney. These valuations have been independently verified. Yes, Your Honor. And these ownership interests are current. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded slowly, then looked back at me. My wife stared at the table. Her hands trembled slightly. Not because of the money, because she was realizing something much more painful. She had spent years believing she understood me, and she hadn't. Not even close. The hearing continued for nearly 2 hours. Every asset was discussed. Every company reviewed. Every valuation confirmed. Nothing had been hidden. Nothing had been transferred. Nothing had been concealed. Everything had always existed exactly where it belonged. The records were public. The ownership structures were legal. The financial statements were accurate. The truth was simple. I never hid my life. People simply stopped paying attention. Eventually, the judge finalized the financial findings. The outcome surprised many people. Not because of what my wife received, because of what she didn't receive. The law worked exactly as intended. No dramatic tricks. No secret loopholes. No revenge. No humiliation. Just facts. She received what she was legally entitled to receive. Nothing more, nothing less. The hearing ended shortly afterward. People slowly filed out of the courtroom. Conversations exploded throughout the hallway. Whispers followed us everywhere. My wife remained seated. For several moments, neither of us moved. Then she finally spoke. Why? It was barely above a whisper. I turned toward her. She looked exhausted, confused, heartbroken. Not because of the divorce, because of the revelation. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. I knew exactly what she meant. Why didn't I tell her about the companies? The investments? The success? The money? The aircraft? The business? For a moment I considered giving a complicated answer. Then I told her the truth, because I thought you loved me enough not to need proof. The words landed harder than any argument ever could. Tears formed in her eyes. Not dramatic tears, not movie tears. Real ones. The kind people cry when they finally understand something too late. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. The marriage had already ended long before the paperwork. This was simply the moment both of us finally admitted it. Outside the courthouse, the pilot waited near the entrance. The private jet remained visible in the distance. Family members stood in small groups discussing everything they had witnessed. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked stunned. A few avoided eye contact entirely. The same people who laughed at my truck that morning now stared at me differently. Ironically, nothing about me had changed. I was still wearing the same clothes. Still driving the same pickup. Still the same man. Only their perception had changed. The pilot approached. We're ready whenever you are, sir. I smiled. Thank you. As we walked away, I glanced back one final time. My wife stood near the courthouse steps. For a brief moment, our eyes met. There was no anger, no resentment, no bitterness, only understanding. Then we both continued in opposite directions. Life moved forward. Over the next several years, my businesses continued growing. New acquisitions, new partnerships, new opportunities. Yet very little changed personally. I kept my truck. I kept living simply. One kept focusing on the work itself rather than the attention that came with it. People often asked why. The answer never changed. Because success had never been about appearances. It had always been about freedom. Meanwhile, my ex-wife rebuilt her own life. She advanced professionally, created new goals, found confidence independent of anyone else. And for that, I was genuinely happy. One afternoon, nearly 4 years later, our paths crossed unexpectedly at a charity aviation event. She recognized me immediately. I recognized her too. For a second, both of us smiled. Not because of what we had been, because of how far we had come. We spoke briefly. No awkwardness. No regret. No attempts to rewrite history. Just two people acknowledging a chapter that had ended. Before leaving, she looked at me and said something I never forgot. I spent years looking at your truck. She paused. When I should have been looking at you. I nodded. Because that was the entire lesson. People judge what they can see. Cars, clothes, houses, titles, bank accounts. But the most important things are often invisible. Discipline, integrity, patience, character, vision. Those qualities rarely announce themselves. They grow quietly while the world looks somewhere else. As the event ended, I walked toward the parking lot. And there it was, my rusty pickup. Older now, a little rougher, still running perfectly. I climbed inside and started the engine. The same engine people once laughed at. The same truck people used to pity. The same truck that never cared what anyone thought. I smiled as I pulled away, because the truck had never changed. The only thing that changed was what people thought they saw when they looked at it. Significant and educational value. This story teaches one of life's most important lessons. Never judge a person's worth by what they own, drive, or wear. Society often mistakes appearances for success, But true success is built quietly through discipline, patience, consistency, and character. The husband never needed luxury cars or expensive clothes to prove his value, because real confidence comes from knowing who you are, not from impressing others. The story also shows how relationships fail when people stop appreciating each other and begin comparing.